My name is Sally Agostino. Normally on a Sunday morning in here we have a church service, Southern Cross Community Church. We consider it a really safe place to explore faith and faith questions, but this morning is not a church service. This morning is a public lecture, and we are thrilled to have Tony Rinaudo here with us, and we'll get to that in a moment. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and we pay respects to elders past and present. We extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and acknowledge that we have much to learn from their connection to country, relationship with land and all living things. So this morning's format is very simple. You've got me for about 1 more minute, so relax. Then Kate is going to come up and introduce Tony and ask him a couple of questions. Then Tony will have the floor for his lecture. But if you've got questions you are bursting to ask, you can hold on to those because there will be a Q&A at the end. So we'll look forward to actually being able to ask Tony questions instead of watching him on YouTube or SBS. So that's exciting. That will be followed by a free morning tea, so please stay around for that. There's a colouring table at the back, which is not only for children. If you think better when you're colouring or drawing or writing notes, please feel free to avail yourself of the back table. And I don't want to let this moment go past without mentioning this. We have some flyers at the back from our lovely friends down the front here. It's part of the Nillumbik Climate Action Team, and they will be running free seminars in March. It's on Saturday the 2nd, Sunday the 3rd, and then the 16th and 17th of March. Incredibly important that we get on board, and I know a lot of Eltham people are already on board, but this is an opportunity to hear more. So please pick up a flyer from the back. And ladies, there might be gentlemen, if you could just put your hand up if you're involved in that group. Thank you. Please take a look at these ladies. And over morning tea, you can ask them any questions about this event. That would be great. Kate, if I can welcome you up. Thank you. No worries.
Good morning, everyone. I can't believe I left my glasses at home. It's such a pleasure to welcome you all and to be introducing Tony this morning. So Tony grew up in regional Victoria. You can stay seated for a while. And then studied a bachelor's degree in rural science in Armidale, New South Wales. And he studied at Bible College in New Zealand. From 81 to 1999, Tony served as an agriculturalist and missionary with serving in mission in Niger, where he oversaw long-term rural development and large-scale relief programs. The following 20 years, he continued working in Niger with World Vision, where he worked closely with local farmers to develop and implement the Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration approach that we're going to hear about today. The impact of FMNR really hit world stage from what I can see from online reports at the United Nations Climate Global Talks in 2018, where satellite images from space showed 6 million hectares of land had been regenerated by FMNR. So it must have been a really uplifting moment, I think, at that occasion, and probably other occasions as well. FMNR grew from strength to strength, with vast tracts of land regenerated in Niger and around the world in other countries, along with complete transformation of lives for those previously living in poverty. Tony's been presented with a fitting selection of awards over the years. I've just got a couple to mention. In my worst French accent, Commandeur du Mérite Agricole from the government of Niger in 1999. The Livelihood Award, which is an alternate Nobel Prize, in 2018. Order of Australia 2019. And last year nominated for an Australian of the Year Award. In 2022, Tony's book, which is up the back, The Forest Underground, Hope for a Planet in Crisis, that was published and voted Australian Christian Book of the Year. The Forest Maker documentary was released on SBS on demand in 23, and it's still available to see for your viewing pleasure. And then a TEDx talk released 3 months ago. I'm sure there's many other things I've missed. So what an inspiring life, Tony. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Come on up the front, and I've got a couple of icebreaker questions. Is your mic on? Swap. Okay. Yeah. All right. Question.
Share glasses and mics.
Yeah. So you've had such a busy, productive life across different countries, at work and at home, and I'm sure you've got extended family as well. How do you like to recharge? What do you do to relax?
Thanks, Kate. So good morning, everyone. Really love gardening. Liz and I enjoy bike riding in the bush, fishing with mates. And I'm not sure if this is relaxing or not, but we love spending time with our 8 grandchildren.
Any of them like Taylor Swift?
Too young.
Okay, thanks. So based on your book and the SBS doco, and from what I know about you, you seem to have this superpower in communication. So you can sort of connect with people from all walks of life, at all different levels of authority and across different languages. I guess, are there any tips that you could offer us if someone's trying to affect change? What's something we could do in communication? What are some tips you could offer?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kate. So I've never considered that I have superpowers. I'm quite reserved, actually. But what's helped me, when I was a boy, my dad had a machinery business for agricultural equipment. And I'd go out with Dad on these jobs, and somehow just absorbing the way he interacted with people without thinking about it. And so I never saw him look down on people, perhaps because they were share farmers and not the farm owner or somebody with a different job. He listened, he asked lots of questions, and he was curious about people. So I think I just imbibed that. But I often think, why do people respond the way that they do? This is a lived experience. I'm not telling somebody else's story. And wherever it comes from, I'm very passionate about what I do, and that comes out automatically. It's not generated. And just the story of trial and failure and eventual succeeding, triumph over insurmountable odds. It's something that really catches people's attention. But I think the passion, the enthusiasm, if there is a secret sauce, perhaps that's it.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Tony to give his presentation.
Thank you again, and thank you, Sally, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honour to be here, and thank you for turning out in such numbers. It's a real encouragement. So, I grew up in the beautiful Ovens Valley. This was my playground. There were a band of boys that lived at the end of our street, and we used to wander uninhibited across those hills, climbing trees, fishing and swimming in the river. In many ways, it was quite idyllic childhood. But there were 3 major things that shaped the person that I am to this day. And one of them was the destruction of that bushland that I loved so much. Often quite steep hills would be cleared for pine plantations, but they would be left fallow for years on end. And even as a little boy, I hadn't studied ecology, but there was something very, very wrong with this picture where all the biodiversity disappeared. There were erosion gullies. It caused muddying and sometimes flooding in the streams. It just didn't add up. At the same time, I was quite curious about the world, and I'd watch the news, I'd read whatever I could on other countries, and I quickly realised that while we had the privilege of growing tobacco in our valley with all the good soil and the irrigation, all the things that we could pour on this weed, there were children who, for no fault of their own, happened to be born elsewhere, that were going to bed hungry. And so I think I grew up very angry. It's just not right, it's not fair. And curious, why are the adult world behaving as if nothing's wrong with this picture? Why are they destroying the environment that all life on Earth depends on just for a quick gain? And so I was very, very frustrated. I didn't have a voice, I didn't have a way of speaking into that situation and changing things. But the third big thing that had an impact on my life was my mum, who had very strong faith. And I think that gave a framework for living, that there are more important things to life than simply financial security, that we are our brother's keeper. We've got a responsibility to care for those less fortunate than ourselves, and we've got a duty of care for the environment. Yes, use it, yes, benefit from it, but don't destroy it, and make sure that it's still there for future generations. So what to do? There I was in my anger and frustration. I did the one thing I felt I had power over. I threw up a child's prayer, just simply saying, please use me somehow, somewhere to make a difference. And I think be careful what you wish for. It may come back at you. Not very long after that, I came across the writings of a British colonial forester, Richard St. Barbie Baker. And after he had a falling out with his employers, he became a kind of self-appointed global forester, protecting very special forests, including parts of the redwood forest in California, but also teaching sustainable forestry. And he would pay for his trips. Everything was by ship in those days, so he'd write his next book on the ship, and that would help pay for the next part of his journey. But it just struck me, wow, not all the adults in this world are out to destroy it. And maybe I could base my life something along the lines of what Baker was doing. So there's a little bit of inspiration there. I thought if I'm going to make a difference, I'd better get some skills under my belt. And so I moved to Armidale, New South Wales, to study agriculture. And that's where I met Liz. That's where I met Liz, and I just want to pay tribute to Liz. I'm the one that gets the award. I'm the one that's up front most often, but this was a joint vision that we had. Liz didn't follow me, we went together, and she's been by my side through very, very hard times and through very happy times all along, so thank you. So there I was at university studying agriculture, and I really felt I was in the right place. But I was plagued by self-doubts. Who did I think I was? What difference did the boy from Myrtleford think he was going to make on a world scale? And it was quite crippling. And it was around that time that I got into the habit of reading a little bit from the Bible every morning. And no matter where I read, I'd keep coming back to this verse. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared beforehand. And it just sort of lifted this weight. I didn't know the whats or the whens or the hows of my future, but this verse told me, but God did. It's in his hands. And if I could just muster up enough faith for today, if I can get through today, then the rest is in God's hands and I could take the next step tomorrow. And that's seen us through, saw us through university, but saw us through very, very difficult times in Africa, times of opposition, of failure, of being thrust into impossible situations. You brought me here, God, help me. And time again, God came through. So we joined a Christian organisation and were placed in a setting in Niger Republic, West Africa. You can see the star there. So a little bit of context. Landlocked country, to this day one of the poorest countries in the world. It's often in the bottom 5, certainly the bottom 10 on the UN scale. And at that time greatly suffering from climate change and from desertification. And here Tony and Liz turn up, the resident experts expected to fix the situation. And I don't think we knew where to start. Nothing at university prepared us for this. In my lifetime, and we were about, 24 years old, Liz, at that time. In my lifetime, what had been a biodiverse dryland forest with fertile farmland in the clearings, with springs, even with wildlife, in just 2 short decades, it had been reduced to its knees, barely able to support life, and on the verge of ecological collapse. So what to do? And we didn't know so much about climate change back then. It wasn't so much in the news, but I was very, very aware of the widespread clearing of the bushland. As populations grew, and over 80% of the population rely on agriculture, either cropping or nomadic herding, it was rain-fed agriculture totally depended on the rains. We know in hindsight that average annual rainfall has dropped. There's been a step down of about 25 to 30%. So climate change was certainly a factor, but that growing population and demand for land so people could grow more food meant there was massive clearing of the land across the southern part of Niger. The consequences of that destruction were devastating. We could have wind speeds at planting time of 60 kilometres per hour, burying the crop outright or sandblasting it so that it just desiccated, bled out in the hot temperatures. And the temperatures are very hot. Bare ground, you could have 70 degrees Celsius temperatures. So a very hostile environment for growing things in. There was increased frequency and severity of drought, windstorms, and frequent hunger periods. So people would often leave, particularly the men, right down to perhaps the age of 10, 12 years old. All the men in the village would leave, go to the cities, go to the neighbouring countries looking for work and food to send back home. You can see a picture of a locust there. Even in the years when we did get adequate rain and you'd expect this year we'll get a good food crop, there was no biodiversity. There were no checks and balances to keep pest numbers down, no habitat for insect-eating birds, spiders, lizards and so on. So even in the good years when you'd hope there'd be good rains, you could have total wipeout because of caterpillars, locusts, sucking insects, you name it, we had it, and it was devastating. In my mind, if deforestation was one of the root causes of all these problems, then surely reforestation, getting trees back in that landscape, would go a long way towards solving those problems. And I think when you're young, you're convinced that you're invincible, that you can solve the world's problems yesterday, and after a very short time, it's quite obvious I wasn't making much progress. And also at that age, it's very easy to get discouraged. And it would have been quite easy to give up and go home on quite a number of occasions. It's not that I didn't try. I read every manual on reforestation in drylands that I could. I consulted any experts that were passing through, asking them questions. I experimented. We got seeds from Australia, from other dry parts of the world. We tried planting before the rains with a little bit of supplementary watering. Everything that you could imagine, we tried it, and it was a total failure. Over 80% of the trees planted died, and to add insult to injury, the very people who we were trying to help called me the crazy white farmer. And I can understand it. Who in their right mind would devote valuable farmland to trees of all things when we're regularly hungry? And one older farmer said to me, Tony, if I plant a tree today, perhaps my grandchildren will benefit, maybe my children, but I never will, and I'm hungry today. I could sympathise with them, but I was very aware there could be no sustainable agriculture, there could be no reliable source of food from that landscape in the absence of trees. Trees were necessary to reduce the wind speeds and the temperatures, to somehow repair the water cycle, to maintain soil fertility and the pest-predator balance. That was the missing link. So I was very, very frustrated. And on one of these days, I could have quite easily given up and gone home. Hopeless waste of time and money. What's the use? And the selfish side of me thinking, people back home, my peers from agricultural classes, they're all getting on with their life and doing well. What am I doing? Wasting my time here, scratching around in the sand. But I did feel called to be there. I did remember that prayer. Use me somehow, somewhere to make a difference. I thought, no, there must be a solution. And the amazing thing is I'd been on this track for about every week for about 2.5 years. Eyes open as I was driving, but totally blind to what had been there all along. And on this particular day, in the photo, I'm reducing the air pressure in the tyres, otherwise you get bogged in the deep sandy soil. And after I did that, I stood up and I'm looking north, south, east, west, barely a tree in the landscape, and thinking, how many $1 million? How many decades? How many hundreds of staff would I need to make even a small dent on that barren landscape? Hopeless, hopeless. But I just turned another time when I threw out a very heartfelt, deep prayer. Forgive us for destroying the gift of your creation. And as a consequence of that, people are suffering. They're hungry, they're poor, they're even fearful for tomorrow. They don't know what the next day will bring. But you love us. Show us what to do. Open our eyes. Help us. And it's amazing to me to this day how blind I'd been on that track for 2.5 years, not seeing what had been there all along. And on this particular day, what appears as a bush, useless-looking bush, it could have been an agricultural weed for all I knew. I'd never stopped and had a closer look before. But this day it caught my attention. And I walked over and took a closer look. And immediately, when we finished the lecture, if you go outside and look at any plant out there, the shape of the leaf for most species tells you exactly what that species is. It's like a signature. And this particular one, very distinctive. It's like the hoof print of a camel. When it steps on the sand, the hoof spreads out and it leaves this very distinctive print. And I realized that's not a bush, that's not a weed, it's a tree. And sure enough, I bent over, brushed away a bit of the sand, and all those stems are pushing up from a stump. It's a tree that had been cut down, and it's suppressed because every year normal farming practice dictated that people had to clear that regrowth and actually rake it up and burn it. And from my travels, I knew there were millions of bushes like this, some most probably from stumps, but many millions also from dormant seeds, particularly in drier zones. The seeds of trees tend to have a very hard seed coat that enables them to survive decades, maybe even centuries. And so there's actually millions of these things coming up every year. They get trampled by livestock in the dry season when there's no crop. They get ploughed over and slashed in preparation for the rain. So as a newcomer to the country, and I guess all the other forestry experts as well, we just didn't see it. However, for me, this was revolutionary. Anybody growing up in Australia, you see what the bush is like after fire. It's all resprouting. You see what gum trees do after you cut them. They coppice, they shoot up. This was the answer to my prayer, and immediately I knew this was going to be revolutionary. It would change everything. I call it the underground forest because if we had special vision, special glasses, and we could see beneath the surface of the ground, you'd realise very, very quickly that when you cut a tree down, for most species at least, the tree doesn't die. And you've got up to 50% of the biomass of the tree, this extensive root system with access to deep moisture, nutrients, stored sugars. It's like this V8 engine. The motor's turned on, but it's not in gear because we keep cutting it and slashing it and burning, ploughing, overgrazing it. It wants to regrow, and if you remove those constraints, you release the spring, you put the V8 engine, the vehicle, into gear, and off she goes. And even in very, very dry climates, environments like Niger, and I've been to even drier in Somalia, these trees grow amazingly rapidly. It's like having this motor pushing it up from underneath. The method came to be known as Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration. And I actually have to say it's not rocket science and it's not even new. It's not like Tony come up with this brilliant new idea. You can find examples of it from around the world going back centuries in one form or another. But we championed it and we promoted it and helped with the farmers to develop a system that suited their agricultural needs. And so what's it consist of? Let's find the bushes that we want to regrow into trees, because there'll be different species there, and you still have to farm. You're not going to let every one of them regrow into a tree and create a dense forest. People still need their crops and their livestock there. So there'll be certain species in an agricultural setting that they will select, and then if in the case of a tree stump, there might be 30 stems growing from one stump or even more, all competing for the same light and moisture and nutrients. We're going to manage that growth and shape it and help it to grow faster. We'll remove the excess the broken ones, the crooked ones, the less vigorous ones, and we'll leave perhaps 5. And there's reasons for that. Perhaps the farmer only wants 1, but the reality is we don't have gas stoves or electricity. We use firewood. And if we only leave 1, it'll be gone tomorrow. But if we leave 5, we can set up a kind of progression. This year we'll just harvest 1 and allow a new sucker to replace it. Next year the remaining 4 will be that much taller, and we'll harvest a second one and allow a replacement. By the time you get to year 5, if the farmer wants, and it's very important that this is deliberately named Farmer Managed. It's not Tony Managed or World Vision Managed. If the farmer wants, we encourage them. Why not leave that remaining 1 to become a tree and just sequentially harvest branches? Maybe a third this year, a third next year. And that way you're not starting from scratch. You're not fighting the goats and, the plough might knock 1 or 2 over. Once it's a tree, it's pretty indestructible. Some people took that advice, others didn't. It tends to be that over time, when people realise actually there's no downside to this, if you select the right kind of trees at the right density and manage them the right way, then crop yields not only don't decline, in this instance, crop yields doubled and livestock production increased. But I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But for me, this was revolutionary. Up until this time, what I was doing was trying to take a technical approach to solving the problem. If I just had the right species, if I just had the right method and enough money, we could reverse desertification. And it was a total failure. And I realized actually everything that you need is literally at your feet. There are millions of these tree stumps across this landscape. And what's inhibiting them from just regrowing on their own? Well, human behavior. And the basis of all our behavior is what we believe. What we believe about the value of trees, the value of the environment, affects how we treat trees and the environment. And so I switched from being, in a sense, a technician to turning enemies of trees into friends of trees. And I'm in the business of regreening mindscapes. If I can convince parents and communities, actually, it's in your best interest to work with nature instead of fighting it and destroying it, you will have a better future for yourself and your children. Yes, use it, but use it in such a way that you don't destroy it. And so to this day, World Vision, with their media people and their marketing people, they're very clever and they have great fun at my expense. Tony the tree whisperer, Tony the forest maker. But they're a little bit surprised. They don't quite know how to take me when I say actually 95% of my time is spent regreening mindscapes, talking to people, asking them simple questions. If we continue business as usual, destroying the environment, what will life be like for our children? And that one hurts. Everyone here wants a better life for their children than the current reality. Fear of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. Everybody wishes for a better future for their children. That one gets their attention. And then you've got a starting point. Would you come on a journey with me? We've seen this situation turn around in other countries. Let's experiment. Not on your whole land. Farmers, and I guess all of us, are naturally risk averse. Let's treat it as an experiment on a small corner of your land and see where it takes us. Fortunately with this, the trees grow really quickly, so I don't have to wait 10 years. We can see substantive changes even in the first year, enough to convince even very, very poor, risk-averse farmers to embrace this thing en masse. So this is leading up to 1983, and I thought, yes, this is the solution. And we found about 10 volunteer farmers in as many villages, and they were working on this. And even just a few months after starting the selection and pruning, those useless-looking bushes are starting to look like small trees. And I thought, yes, this is going to revolutionise everything. 1983, then events beyond our control took over. It didn't rain that year. People were hungry. parents, the adult men and boys were leaving en masse, looking for food and money to send back home. Eventually, even the women and children had to leave when they ran out of any source of food. It was one thing as a child to see hunger on television. It certainly affected me emotionally, but I didn't have any relationship with those people on the other side of the world. Just as likely to turn the telly off and go into the fridge or go out and play. You didn't have a connection. In 1983, this was very different. I knew these people. I'd slept in their huts. I'd eaten their food. And when they came to town, reciprocated. They stayed at our place very often. And we shared our food with them. And I knew their children. And now they were suffering. So it was a very, very difficult time. And the pressure was building up. We didn't have any money to mount a major famine relief effort. I wasn't with World Vision back then. We didn't have a big marketing branch able to raise money quickly. There appeared to be no grain in the city that we lived in. Even though Maradi is a major trading city with Nigeria next door, we went to all the major outlets selling grain, and there appeared to be none. Importantly, we didn't have permission. We were expatriates. You just can't go and do your own thing. The premier of the state at that time was very opposed to what we were doing and thought this was a government job, not that they were doing anything, and refused to give us written permission to help people. And so you can imagine, these are my friends, they're suffering and they're starting to come to our place. They're sleeping on the dirt outside our compound, waiting for me to get out and try and get to the car. My oldest son, Ben's here with us today. And I remember one day trying to push through the crowd to get to my car so I could go to town and get help. And we hear this booming voice from behind me. Didn't you hear? Dad hasn't got any food to give you. Let him go through. And I turned around, this voice coming from my 5-year-old son. The crowd parted like the water of the Red Sea. I think he frightened them. But it was a very, very difficult time. And one morning I usually get up early, trying to eat my breakfast, and lump was forming in my throat. Tears were starting to well. The Bible was just randomly opened on the table next to my cereal. And my eyes fell on the page, 2 Chronicles chapter 20:15. Fear not, and be not dismayed by this great multitude. And there was certainly a crowd out there, sleeping out there every night. Fear not, and be not dismayed by this great multitude, for the battle's not yours, it's mine, says the Lord. And I didn't know what, I didn't know when, but I knew God was going to do something very, very dramatic. And within 2 weeks, that premier who had blocked us from getting permission died. Now, don't blame me. I just prayed for a promotion, but I guess he got the big call. He died, and the mayor of the city was put in his place in the interim, an old friend of the mission. Sure, what's the problem? They actually had a system across the country, government grain reserves that were there for times like this. Sure, what's the problem? Here's your permission. And over the next 6 to 8 months, churches, individuals, a little bit of government money came in. We received $500,000. And when that guy died, mysteriously the grain appeared. I think he had his thumb on the merchants. And we purchased 1,800 tons of grain and were able to distribute that to over 35,000 people. I know it reached many more than that, because in Africa nobody eats alone. There's probably 50 to 70,000 people that benefit. But what's that got to do with the story? Instead of just caving in and giving food aid, which is a lovely thing to do and it saves lives, but it doesn't prepare people for the next disaster and the next one after that. Can we draw the best possible outcome out of a terrible situation and make it a force for good? And so we're able to engineer what's called Food for Work program. And if you're hungry, if you want the food, then one of the requirements is that you regenerate 40 of these useless bushes per hectare on your farmland. And you can imagine, oh, Tony's so cruel. Doesn't he know when those trees grow, they'll shade our crop and we'll be even more hungry? But I had the grain, they were hungry, and I had a captive audience. And I knew it would work. I had a captive audience for the best part of 8 months. And so that was the start of an agricultural revolution that sped across Niger. And you can see the satellite image on the left from the late 1970s and on the right from the late 1980s. The landscape had boasted less than 4 trees per hectare. And a lot of that land on the left there hasn't got any whatsoever in the 70s, to an average of 40 per hectare in the 80s. And over the following 20 years, this spread to 5 million hectares. And without planting a single tree, they regenerated 200 million trees. And in the years since then, the latest survey, which wasn't complete, it's over 6 million. So even in the absence of any expatriates, certainly no money going into it, just this thing works, this thing benefits me. It's spread from farmer to farmer and continues to do so. And in fact, through World Vision now and through other organisations, it's spreading globally. And we've introduced this approach into about 40 countries and counting. And so farmers were creating what we call agroforestry parklands. It's not a national park. We do have an example, it'll come up later. We'll have an example where we can lock up nature for nature's sake, but even that, not completely. This is agricultural land. People still have to eat and make a living. And so they're growing their crops and raising their livestock in between the trees. And the irony of it is crop yields more than doubled, plus their livestock production increased. Many of these trees are excellent fodder trees. And you can imagine in a country that has, in a good year, 8 months with no rain whatsoever, there's not much grass growing. How did they live in the past? Well, they had forest. The leaves, the seed pods, and in some species, even the bark has some nutritional value. You have this kind of aerial haystack on demand. So it just changed everything. They keep jumping. And so this was revolutionary. We came home in 1999, and I joined World Vision. And I thought, wonderful, the world's my oyster. World Vision works in 100 countries. All of them are impacted by deforestation to one degree or another, and that affects children. Some of you may be wondering, what's World Vision doing in this environment space? And my response to that is, well, if you love children, then you have to love the environment too. Where does our air, our food, our water come from? A nice, secure place and beautiful place to live in and grow up in. If you love children, you have to love the environment. It's got everything to do with World Vision. But here I am in this organisation that works in 100 countries. Let me at it. And my big breakthrough came with a project in Ethiopia in 2006. And this community had been food aid dependent for about 20 years. World Vision entered this region in 1984, the same year that we had famine in West Africa. People here were suffering. They helped many thousands of people. They stayed on. There was a few years of rehabilitation. Let's get them restocked and seed bank and schools and so on. And then 20 years of development phase, helping them to just holding their hand until they took over those things on their own. I joined in 1999, and I was astounded that even in often a much better environment than what we had in Niger, they certainly had droughts, but they had much more rainfall when it did rain than we got in Niger. And yet, year after that famine, World Vision was still obliged to provide some level of food aid. Some years more, some years less. And when I thought about it, I realised actually we've neglected to address one of the key underlying root causes of all these problems, environmental destruction. And you can see the bare hill on the left there. When people were very, very poor, how do you stay alive? You cut down trees, you make charcoal, sell it, and then you buy food, and your family lives. So in a sense, they had no choice. So that was the backdrop. Then in 2006, we had the opportunity to apply these same principles of Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration not on agricultural land, but on nearly 3,000 hectares of bushland, too hilly to do agriculture on. Within 6 years, this historically food aid dependent community sold 104 tonnes of grain to the World Food Programme. And even I was a little bit surprised. I said, how does that work? This isn't even your farmland. What's happening here? And they said, Mr. Tony, in those drought years when we didn't get enough rain, our crops failed, our animals died, and there was no bush reserve to fall back on. We couldn't chop trees, there was no wild harvest. But as the forest came back, then we had all those other options. We keep beehives, we've got fodder, we've got raising our animals, and when those clouds hit our mountain, even though it's less rain than what we'd really like, what rain comes falls on us and misses our neighbours because there's less wind, lower temperature, and what falls is retained better by the higher organic matter content soils. And in the wet years, we'd get wonderful wet years, but the bald hill, all the rain would be shed. It would flood down here, there'd be mudslides, even boulders burying our crop. We couldn't use that farmland for the whole season, and we'd still go hungry. All that had changed. It took the risk out of farming, or a lot of the risk out of farming. So all that messaging that World Vision had given about better methods, better seed, fertilising your soil, the farmers aren't silly. They didn't want to invest all that time and money and have it wash away. But now that risk had been largely alleviated or eliminated, they started to invest in agriculture, became self-sufficient, and eventually had a surplus as well. And so what we witness when we do this at scale is the rehydration of the landscape. Much more of the moisture soaks in and recharges springs and wells and so on. And this return of the lost biodiversity, which is another problem in itself if you don't handle it well, but better to have that problem, which can be managed, than to have total loss of what had been there before. So today I'm in this wonderful position. I've had all these years with World Vision where I've been sowing the seeds of this idea in up to 40 countries, and sometimes I get to go back and visit and just see what's it like, what's the changes. And what I witness is what had been a downward spiral of degradation and poverty and despair. Today farmers can grow more and different types of crops because of better microclimate, more fertile soils. So that downward spiral's reversed. We've got this upward spiral, restoration, relative prosperity. You can't compare them to our situation. Nobody driving a Merc, but it's much, much better than before. Most importantly, what I see is hope, the return of hope. And if you could imagine what must it be like to be a parent, you can't give your kids enough food, you can't put nice clothing on them, they're running around in rags, you can't even send them to school, partly because you can't afford the books, but partly because you need their labour to help the family survive. I think it would be soul-destroying. I think as a parent I'd feel like a failure. And then there's this simple thing, literally a solution at your feet that empowers people. It enables people to create that future that they want. And it's liberating. You can see when I go back, it's party time. Tony, come and see what we've done. And I love that. It's not, Tony, come and see what you've done. They own this thing. There's no stopping them. And they're so excited they talk to their neighbours. And their neighbours talk to their neighbours. That's how it spread in Niger. And that's how it's spreading around the world. And so, yeah, clapping and singing and shouting, people just so happy to share the changes that they've seen. So I don't have to say much about climate change. I think you'd have to be not reading the papers or listening to the news or even stepping outside to not realise something very, very serious is happening in our world. And it has devastating consequences for food production, for people's ability to live where they've always lived, for security and so much more. Well, I don't want to finish on a negative note. I'm actually hopeful, not in myself, not in technology. Technology is certainly going to be part of the solution, but I've seen the way God's worked in Niger, and I've seen the power of nature to heal itself if given a chance, and the power of ordinary people to effect great change. Now, each individual farmer's actions mightn't count for much, but you add up millions of farmers, and there's 500 million smallholder farmers in the world. This is a force for good. It's estimated that there are over 3 billion hectares of degraded land worldwide, much of it with some level of potential for restoration. And estimates vary widely, but it's said that if we could just restore 1 billion of the 3 that are destroyed, we could draw down anything from 16% to 25% of existing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not a total solution. We still have to stop emitting. We have to do many other things. But imagine if we could draw down 25% in a relatively short time, what a powerful force for good and fighting climate change that would be. And so my CEO said that I'm not allowed to retire. And World Vision's target is to restore 1 billion hectares of degraded land worldwide. We'll take on our own portion of that, what we commit to, and we'll measure, and we will give the information away, we'll cajole, we'll entice, we'll try to get as many partners as we can, but if people want to do it on their own and run with it, that's fine too. So I'm very, very happy to be working for World Vision. I wish I was 20 years younger, but this is exciting for me. And to think, there's no real downside to this. It's win-win. It helps to reverse biodiversity loss. It fights climate change, both mitigation, drawing down the excess gases, but also helping people to adapt to a level of unavoidable climate change. And many, many other things. Repairs the water cycle, and I could go on all day just about that. So I'm quite excited. And somebody once said, if you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain, then by all means, go for it. Give it all you got. Don't hold back. There's nothing to lose in doing this. And I think that's what I love doing now, and look forward to continue doing as long as I can. And perhaps just make one more comment. Augustine of Hippo in the 4th century, he wrote these words, and I was sharing this because I speak to a lot of young people around the world, and it's quite frightening to see how despairing they are, and a lot of them have lost hope. They feel it's too late to reverse climate change, and the temptation is to either just crawl up in a ball and do nothing, or go out and be an obstruction on the streets and have the rest of the world think you're crazy. And Augustine said, hope has 2 beautiful daughters. And the name of the first daughter is anger. Anger at the way things are. And I remember that little boy growing up in Myrtleford was very angry. How could they pour DDT into our rivers, kill the fish? We swim in that, we drink that water. How could they do that? How could it be that we grow tobacco and people over there hungry? It didn't add up. I was angry. The name of the second daughter is courage. Courage to not leave the wrong things as they are. Courage to get up and do something about it. And I think perhaps many of us, certainly some young people, we think hope magically falls out of the sky onto the shoulders of a lucky few. But my life experience would argue, no, you make hope happen by your actions. What is that one thing that God's put in your heart that you're passionate about and you can do? My thing's trees, yours will be something else perhaps. What is that one thing that's in your heart? Can you take an action today and then build on that action tomorrow and the next day? And in time, have a very, very big impact on the things that make you angry. Thank you.
Gosh, how lucky are we? That was amazing, Tony. Thank you. It's time for some questions. Now, we are live streaming this, and I tell you that for two reasons. One is that this is something you can pass on. For all those people, as you're hearing this, you're going, so-and-so should be here. Well, so-and-so can be here by watching this back on live stream. But the second reason I say it is that if you're asking a question, I'm just going to ask Tony to almost reiterate the question or answer it in a way, because the live stream people won't hear that.
Thank you.
Yep. So back to you.
Okay. Feel free to ask Liz questions too.
How do you protect the trees once you chop them and prune them? Because I'm thinking there's still livestock that could eat them. There's still other people around who don't know about the method or come down and chop it. How do you do that?
I don't. So the question is, how do I protect the trees? And it's a very good question, because a lot of tree planting schemes around the world fail for this very reason. Livestock come in, perhaps there's fires, and so many different reasons why trees die. And when we did that Ethiopian project, the 3,000 hectare forest, because it's a carbon trading project, the community were earning carbon credits as they grew the trees. So we were dealing with the World Bank, and the experts said, well, you have to budget for ring lock fence around this. And I said, nonsense. If you fence this area, and I know you have the money to do it, then how are you going to repair the rest of Ethiopia? Will you fork out the money to fence the whole country? You won't. And so what we do is we use social fencing. And remember that question I asked, if we continue business as usual, destroying the environment, what does the future hold? The future is very, very bleak. They're already against the wall, backs against the wall. If it gets worse, they'll leave home. They'll be in slums somewhere. They'll be separated as families. And so, people ask me for fencing, and I say, well, actually, who owns the animals? Often it's the village that you're working with, but often, just as often, it's not. It's nomads, it's other villagers. Can we talk to them and bring them in on this trial that we're going to do? Because at the end of the day, everyone benefits. If those trees grow, there'll be less flooding, less severe droughts, more fodder, more fuel wood, and many, many other things. Those herders that are traditionally so difficult to convince to work with us, they will benefit, even if they're only passing through for 1 month of the year. If they respect those trees, once they grow, they'll have an aerial haystack. And so on and so forth. So it's social fencing. The first example in Niger, that was a little bit artificial. People were hungry, and we used food for work. So I had a captive audience, and it was in their interest to protect those trees. But even there, it's an agricultural situation, and you have a 5 to 6 month window when the crop's growing. And traditionally, and even in modern legal terms, it's a directive of the government, livestock must be locked up during the rainy season. So you've got a 6 month window of opportunity to let those things really grow fast. And sure, once the crop's in and there's no fencing, the livestock are free range, sure, there'll be some damage. But if enough people are doing this, as a percentage, the damage is very small. And yeah, it works. There's 6 million hectares in Niger without a single fence. It works. Yeah.
I went to Madagascar last year, and it was very interesting to observe the farming system there, in that away from the water courses, they regularly burnt the entire landscape, and there was obviously large fires going on because they wanted fresh grass shoots. And there was no evidence to me that there were any residue of tree seeds or even, as we found in Niger, the roots of trees in the dry land areas. How do you tackle a farming system like that, which appears to have exhausted the original forest cover and biomass that might have been there thousands of years ago?
Thank you. So the question, and what's your name?
Julius.
No worries. Julian's been to Madagascar and he witnessed the farming system there where they burn everything every year and has the appearance of, there's no rootstocks there, there's no seeds in the ground. Where do you start? How do you reverse that situation? And this is one of the surprising things. Well, first of all, it's about mindset change. Can we change that practice, or at the very least alter it? And I'm learning and becoming much more respectful of cultural burning here. I was always against fires, but it's very nuanced, and the way they do it's regenerative. So I'm less critical of that now. But how can we alter the way they're treating that landscape so that natural regeneration has a chance? The amazing thing that we've found, even in highly degraded landscapes that appear to have nothing left in them, it's there. It could be dormant seeds, it could be stumps that are so suppressed, you're not seeing the shoots coming up, but they're there. And in the very worst case scenario, if behaviour changes and you alter the burning regime, you manage your livestock differently so that you don't have them on the same land continuously trampling and browsing, alter those behaviours and nature will find a way to come back in. Seeds from the wind, from bird droppings, from livestock. I don't know how they do it, but the seeds will come back and they'll find a more receptive environment to germinate and thrive in once those behaviours have changed. In Somaliland, the nomads really didn't want to give up any land. They thought that World Vision's really lost their marbles. This is desert. And besides, we need every metre for grazing. Look at how hungry our animals are. But they had a lot of respect for World Vision because of the health and the food support and so many different things. They said, well, we better humour them. We don't want to lose them. And so they gave us the most degraded parcel. And they said, at least they can't make it any worse. And lo and behold, and I've got a beautiful photo, maybe I can put it up later, the stumps are there, the seeds are there. Behaviour change, it gave it a chance to come up. Just amazing.
So this relies on individual farmers. What about big corporations? Because surely big corporations must be responsible for a lot of the land clearing and the destruction. Is there any way of engaging them, or does this just rely on individual farmers doing what's right in their interest, but corporations just carry on raping and pillaging and taking?
If Tony prays, they just dies.
So the question was, what about big corporations? I work with farmers and communities. How do you engage with them? And the comment from the side panel here was Tony just needed to pray for them and they would die. I hope not. I guess, yeah, it's not really my area, but I guess there are corporations that do have a sense of social responsibility and do try to do the right things. And my entry point would be to try and work with them. I deeply suspect that the same question would apply for them. What legacy do you want to leave for your children, for the world? How do you want to be, what do you want written on your tombstone? Now, it'll work for some, maybe not others, but you've got to start with the ones that at least will listen. And I've got a good friend, I can't think of his first name, Poynton. Scott Poynton. He lives in Switzerland now, but he's an Aussie, and he was influenced by that same colonial forester that I was. And he spent much of his career working with palm oil moguls, trying to convince them that you can do this differently. Yes, stay in business, sell your product, but you don't have to have a scorched earth policy. Not all of them listened, but a lot of them were worried about what their investors were saying and what the image of the buying public was. Yeah.
What sort of resources do you need? Like, do you have a team? Like, I wish you could keep working for another 50 or 60 years. And what sort of training would people need to do what you do?
So what sort of resources do I need, and do I have a team? Since our CEO made this declaration that we're going to restore 1 billion hectares, we actually have 9 people in our immediate team here in Australia now. And I don't do any technical stuff anymore. I'm just kind of ambassador that talks about this stuff. So there are people who strategize, those who design projects, those who work out how we measure this thing. It's good and well to say you're going to do 1 billion hectares, but you've got to report on it. So people working on that and so on. And then World Vision works in 100 countries. Most of our staff in those developing countries are from the countries themselves. And over the last years, especially since 2012, put a lot of effort into training. And so there's many Tonys and emerging Tonys out there equally as passionate as I am. I could easily step out. What resources? So this is a low-cost method, but it's not no cost. It costs money to get out and talk to the villagers, to follow up, to organise exchange visits so that farmers can meet farmers doing this, to advocate to governments that actually if you just tweaked those policies, government's very good at making policies that have unforeseen effects. And so in Niger, for all of the time that I lived there, the government was very worried about the desert moving south and the loss of trees, so they copied French forestry law. All trees, even on private farmland, belongs to the government. So good intention will protect what's left. Opposite effect. Not my tree, not his tree. I better cut it today before he comes and takes it. So I've gone on a bit of a tangent there. So we use money to try and talk to these people, take them to the villages. And fortunately, a lot of governments have high targets. In Kenya, they want to plant, I don't know if it's 100 million trees in the next decade. So they've set these impossible targets for themselves that'll be exorbitantly expensive and technically a failure. Can you come on this journey with us? Try it on a small corner of your country and see what the impact is. Oh yeah, and they figured out somewhere along the line that there's only one Tony, and so we have online training course on this method, and we've been able to reach people from 40 or 50 countries, and not just World Vision staff, anybody else that wants to do it as well. So those are the kinds of resources. Yeah. One more question. Anyone from the back that are, yeah? Thank you.
Well, thank you for wrapping that up so beautifully for us. That was well done. There are only two things I want to say before you are welcome to go and get a cup of tea or coffee and something to eat. The first one is that you can purchase Tony's book. Liz will be up there with her little square pouch. So $39.95. I've bought a couple of copies of this for family members and didn't have one to bring along. I really wanted Tony to sign it, but I buy another one. There's always a solution, isn't there, Dave? Always a solution. Now, the last thing I want to tell you is that we do have another public lecture coming up, but it's not until June, so I don't have a nice graphic to show you. But those of you who were here 2 years ago when we started public lectures will remember Phil Badderham. He's Emeritus Professor at the School of Bioscience at the University of Melbourne. He's kindly agreed to come back and speak to us again. And his topic is gene editing. And he said it has applications in medicine, the environment and agriculture. If this would be of interest, he said. I said that would very much be of interest. If those who heard his last lecture will appreciate how wonderful it was. So if you would like to hear back from the live stream today, pass that link on to someone, or if you'd like to just keep an eye on the Green Wedge public lecture page on the church website, the easiest way to do that, the signs, there's one at the top there and there's one just outside the door, has a QR code. So if you just go to that QR code, it'll give you the link and you'll just have to save it somewhere. So thank you so much for coming out today. I'm sure you'll agree, it was time very well spent. And if we can give Tony one last thank you, that would be great. Morning team.